Jigs catch bigs. That's why it rhymes, dude. And a couple months ago, we busted 41 pounds on a little custom kind of finesse jig that I came up with. A lot of the smallmouth guys have been using it. I kind of put my own little twist on it. Absolutely epic for both forward facing as well as dragging for those spring kind of staging and pre-spawn fish. But it's summer, right? It's hot, these fish have moved kind of offshore. I actually take this jig mod and make a few little changes to it to tweak it to catch some of these offshore fish and these fish during these summer hotter months. So if you guys like fishing OG lures like a jig, but you want a little bit of a modern twist on it, you want to do it a little bit differently, I think you guys are going to dig this video. Hit that like and subscribe button for me. I'm going to show you exactly how to set this thing up. You're going to need a couple things to put this jig together. And the first one is the biggest change we're making on this deal. Originally, we used a ball head style finesse jig for this deal. Perfect for spring, really good on that forward facing jig drop style technique, but it's summer and one of these standards is a football style jig, but we don't want to be like everybody else, right? We want to do it a little bit different. So Boss offers this guy right here. It's a standard football jig, but it has this sort of flat spot, a lot like those spot remover kind of shaky head deals. And what it actually does is it's gonna stand up when it's on the bottom like that, and it's actually gonna add to what we're gonna put on the back end of it in just a minute, which I'm gonna show you. The other thing that you're gonna need is some kind of skirt making kit. So I always carry my Bass Mafia bag with me. I have a Skirts Unlimited kind of easy skirt making kit. It's super handy, dude. Chatterbait skirts, spinnerbait skirts, jig skirts like this. I can make them right on the boat, any color, any variation, match the hatch, right? There are some components in it though that are a little bit crappy. Let's just put it out like it is. So the collars it comes with, they're those collars that when you open up your tackle box, you know, the skirt has exploded. They rot, right? So what I do is I actually get these guys. Once again, it's a Boss product. These are these little O-rings. All this stuff's available on Tackle Warehouse, and I'll put links to it down in the description below. So these O-rings, they actually do two things. One, they last a lot longer, they're stronger, they don't rot out as easily. And two, because it's a smaller point of pressure, it's a little skinnier ring, it actually causes that skirt to fluff out in a different manner and gives you a much better kind of umbrella style look to the jig. I make a custom skirt color, which I kind of call it the everything color, dude. It's got a little bit of everything and covers a little bit of everything, whether it's brim, shad, some kind of bait fish, and it's a couple really simple colors that you almost always find in nature. So one of them is kind of a magic crawl, right? It's got that iridescent but green finish, so it's like reflective, it changes in the light. And then the other one is kind of a semi-transparent, blue reflective, but like pearl base kind of look. So what you're gonna do, and I've already put the O-rings on it, is you slide an O-ring right onto this tube right here, and then you're gonna take this little hook, it looks like an old Charlie Chaplin, like pull you off the stage kind of deal, and you're gonna drop that hook through that tube like that. So then you're gonna wanna line up your jig skirts just like this. Now, FYI, I'm still running 2 sheets of jig skirt material, and there's a very simple reason. I'm looking for kind of a finesse, low impact approach, and also jig skirt material, the more you put on it, the more it slows the fall of that jig. I'm trying to use a kind of a lighter jig. I'm using a 1/2 ounce, and sometimes I'll even use a 3/8. And with more jig material, I'm gonna have to go up with weight, and I really look at this as a finesse presentation. I can play around with the trailers to kind of give it a different fall and give it different movement, but I wanna stay kind of thin on that jig skirt material. Then all you're gonna do is take your Charlie Chaplin hook with that thing dangled right through the middle, and you basically just hook that skirt material right in the middle, and then you're going to draw it through, be nice and gentle, and bring it about halfway through, just like that, maybe a hair more. And then all you need to do is roll these rings to the end, and they're going to drop right onto the middle of that skirt material, just like that. Now, if you screwed it up a little or you're off a little, the nice part about these O-rings is they roll, so I can roll it one direction or the other. Super simple. You just take your football jig, you try to find the middle of that skirt material, you slide it right on there, and then once again, this is where the O-ring is kind of nice. There's some collars on that jig right there. You want to roll onto that main collar, and you just roll it up that hook shank just like that, and then onto the keeper, and then right onto there. Then all you're going to do is take your scissors right here, you find those tabs, and we're just cutting the ends for now, and then we're going to mod it, but you cut those end tabs just like that, and you have a rough draft of a football jig skirt right there. And then what I'm gonna do first off is trim it on the bottom so it's a little closer to the hook right there. And then I'm gonna turn it over and let the front kind of dangle down. And all we're trying to do is get a semi-finesse jig look that's a little bit bulkier than your like short collar finesse jigs. That actually looks really good to me. I might trim a little more off the back, but you get the idea. So it looks like a brim, it looks like a shad, it looks like a bait fish, and we've changed out the head so it's that flat-sided football, so it's gonna stand up super cool when it's on the bottom. So let's talk trailers, because this is another thing that we're changing up a little bit. And on that original kind of finesse ball head, we put a little power Ned. So it was kind of like a skirted Ned style jig, and we're gonna keep to that concept a little, but it's summer, they're eating bigger stuff. I wanna go a little bit bigger. So the first trailer that I actually use for that is I take just a Gambler Ace or a Gambler Fat Ace. You guys have seen me use these guys a ton, because for some reason a stick bait, you know, of all the minnow dangling and all that, the stick bait still shows that it's a golden asset to your kind of bass fishing arsenal. And what we're gonna do is take that scissors and actually clip it just above the worm sack. Now, what's gonna happen is we're gonna get a little bit longer kind of Ned style presentation and a little bit thicker. And then you're just going to thread that thing on. So it's kind of like a combination of a stick bait jig as well as a Ned sort of like stub. And it looks freaking good. And what also ends up happening, if you can see, is because you use that wider style stick bait on there, it actually pushes up and flares out the bottom portion of that skirt just like that. So this thing's gonna stand up and dangle around. Now, there's not as much salt in the Gambler Ace as there is in, say, your Senkos and stuff like that. So it's actually gonna float up a little bit. If you guys wanna use like TRD, like elastic style stuff, that's another good option, because it's going to make it float up and sort of stand up and accentuate that flat spot on the football head. So the other one, this one's really sneaky. So back in like 2014, 2013 maybe even, I started doing a lot of offshore fishing, and I figured out this presentation down in Florida for catching magnums, dude. And I called it the wacky jig. So I was using a much bigger presentation at that point. We were using a bait called the Obese, which is a giant magnum stick bait. I think Tactical Bassin was using like a big Senko, like a 7-inch Senko. I've downsized since then. It seems like finesse is kind of the key, but still doing power presentations like we've talked about. What I do is I actually take this bait right here. This is one of my favorite kind of different style stick baits. It's a Demiki Stinger. It's basically a standard stick bait, but it has a little different look to it. It has much more of a sickle tail and kind of a fat head to it. And what you're gonna do is simply wacky rig this thing. So you're gonna hook it right through the middle, and it looks super duper funky, right? But what you end up with is this wacky style presentation down on the bottom. And the other thing is you get this kind of cool fall. So you get that shaking, that flexing, that you kind of action from the bait. But then if you pop that thing up, like I'm gonna show you a little kind of sneaky retrieve in a second, when you pop that thing up, you get this cool kind of shaking, you know, Senko wacky flutter down to the bottom, and then it stands up on the bottom. It's something completely different than what these fish are seeing. They see Nico rigs, they see guys kind of shaking a minnow style Nico over their heads, but rarely do they see something like this with that dragging sign, kind of like Nico presentation. So last thing, because I'm sweating bullets, dude, and I want to go offshore and catch some fish. So presentation and setup. And I think this is one of the most important key things, because we're fishing like a standard bait that we've modified, right? But one of the big things is how you fish it and how you differentiate it in your presentation, both of the bait as well as what you're doing with that rod and reel, right? So I use a pretty standard setup. This is a 7-foot Halo XD3 medium heavy, dude. Super light, super great, kind of budget rod, comes in around $100. I run it on 15-pound fluorocarbon, and this is actually a little Dobbins reel. It's like a 7-speed, you know, standard kind of, you know, your standard bait caster reel, dude. And what I like to do is this. So obviously you can drag both of these setups, both the wacky as well as this kind of Magnum football Jed style jig. You just drag it along the bottom, you bump hard spots, shell, rock, trees, stumps, things along those lines. The sneakier thing that you can do, there's two different ways, and they both relate to kind of making a reaction or creating a reactive instinct in these fish. We've talked about it with the scrounger heads, we've talked about it with the chatterbait, even a minnow. So one thing is, we've heard of stroking a jig. It's where you kind of rip that jig up, almost fishing it like a spoon. I do something like that, but a little bit different. I want to keep this jig kind of lower and closer to the bottom. So instead of going over my head and ripping that bait, I actually side drag this thing ever so slow just along the bottom, and then every once in a while with slack line, I just double swack it, dude. Just double whack. You know, we all do that, dude. But you double whack, right? And what it does is it creates this popping motion of the jig. The jig darts forward twice. It pops once and then it pops again. But doing it on the side actually keeps that bait a little bit lower than when you're actually stroking the jig. So you're kind of darting it along the bottom, so those fish that might have been following, it forces them to make a decision and dart to it and eat it as it flutters, or, you know, give up. You got a 50-50 shot. The other thing too is with those trailers and with the skirt material, it sort of gives that jig sort of a hover aspect to it, and then it gives it that shake, whether it's the wacky rig kind of waving and shaking as it sinks, or that more magnum kind of Ned stick bait on the back doing that S, and then like that darting back and forth as it's jumping through the water. So you have this kind of cool sort of double timed action. Now the other one, and this is kind of like that scrounger presentation that we talked about, is what I like to call the fast reel. It works with practically any bait that we have, chatterbait, hair jig, like swim bait, whatever you got. And all you're gonna do is you're gonna do your standard dragging technique. You're gonna get that bait on the bottom and drag it. And then every once in a while, you're gonna put like 4 or 5 fast reels on the reel. Super simple, right? Just have it kind of taut, do 2 or 3, 4 or 5, and all you're doing is once again jumping that bait forward, but it seems like there's a different sort of presentation to reeling versus jerking. Yeah, who knows? Like, you tell me, right? But that reeling does something a little bit different, even though there's still kind of both the same concepts where you're moving that bait a little faster, trying to get that reaction. But both of those retrieves, along with your standard dragging style retrieve, have been super successful for me offshore. It kind of covers all your bases. You have your slow, very methodical approach, and then you have 2 different ways to kind of get a reaction and trigger these fish to bite. We're gonna wrap this thing up because I'm gonna head offshore and try to catch a few, but try to build yourself one of these finesse jigs, dude. It's a lot of fun customizing tackle like this, and the other thing is there's a whole different level of satisfaction you get from catching a bass on a bait or a jig or a custom kind of thing that you put together, dude. And you can tweak it specifically for your body of the water or your fish that you know what they want, colors-wise, size-wise, all that kind of stuff. I'll put links to all this stuff down at Tackle Warehouse, as well as Monster Bass for you guys to check out down in the description box if you want to try to build your own jig. But hit that like and subscribe button for me. Appreciate all the support on the videos, my homies. We're gonna go dangle a bit.